This is Nick Hyam from thewholenessofexperience.com. Here's part 2 of our 2022 Rewind, in which we attempt to answer the impossible question, what is non-duality? What is reality? Reality is the sum total of all things. Reality encompasses what is. What is only reality. So your entire experience, your entire field of experience right now, internal, external, is reality. Wherever you go, that's reality. And there's a belief within that there's a me that isn't reality, that has to become reality, has to become the absolute. What actually is the individual? What do you mean when you say I? And can whatever you're referring to become enlightened? Can that I realize truth? You know that you exist, you know that you're conscious, you feel alive, you recognize this sentience within you and within the world around you. And it turns out that consciousness and reality are the same. That felt sense of being, we could call it Atma. That self that you are, that is consistent even when the facets of what you believe you are come and go and change. There's always the consistent you. That consciousness attracts identities, it attracts all these things that come and go that aren't fundamental to what you are. And you believe you are those things. Like the self that you are is like the sky, that is always the sky. And then there are these clouds that you focus on and therefore you lose sight of the sky. The clouds are part of the sky. You can't separate the clouds from the actual balloonist of the sky. So even this stuff that isn't not fundamental to yourself, even that is only the self.
Who really are you? I mean, if you drop everything, asking that question is kind of like a character in a dream at night, asking, who am I really? You are dreaming, you are not in the dream. You never actually left your bed, so to speak. And that's the same situation here. You never left the absolute. And because you're reality, because you have ultimate power to dream, it's fully believable that you are this little thing that thinks it has its own individual life separate from everything else. That just shows the power of who you are as reality, the fact that can even happen. And it's all just taken for granted as, oh, I'm this person going through time and space. But if you're really here without any reference points, without any reference to the past whatsoever, there's no contracted person. You give the fuel to it by looking to the past, looking for past experiences. But it never really happened. Individuality is a figment within this moment. It's not actually a reality in and of itself. It's like flowing that creative force of the universe into a focus point, and then it does seem real. But the advantage there is it never is real. This is the absolute. This can't be other than the absolute. Your experience right now is the absolute. You cannot find yourself anywhere, yet you find yourself everywhere.
If we believe we are limited in any way, as a body, as anything, then we're moved by the forces of desire and fear. And that's a very unstable, vulnerable, insecure place to find yourself. But it never is true. It never is true that you are defined, limited at all. The meaning-making machine we call the mind draws imaginary lines, instantly creates stories to manufacture a sense of security, and what it's always doing is applying conditions. The relative, the conditional, can only ever attempt to capture reality. And you can be sure that anything the mind can come up with is only something synthetically created and not the true flavour of reality. We're so used to going along with the mind's assumptions, ideas, beliefs. So we have to step back, so to speak, and begin to see clearly. in going beyond mind to what is already here, what is already true. All the qualities of true self are unveiled. Words are seen to only attempt to describe what is, and what is obviously beyond words. Then what is pointed to, no matter what is pointed to, shares the same nature, and therefore you can celebrate every expression once you know the truth of every expression. Once you realize that no expression can define you, can limit you, can confine you, can imprison you, then you recognize that all of that is you knowing yourself. None of it is out of place once you recognize the nature of what already has a place in you and as you. You know, awakening is only the appreciation of the nature of I, and that any expression of I is only the same, ultimately. So you are already and always immersed in and as this immediacy and intimacy of what you truly are. Feel into what you already know deeply. Total unknowing, mind-based unknowing, leads to absolute knowing.
Yeah. The typical perspective is, I know exactly what's going on here. The mind desperately wants to tell itself it knows what's here, because then it feels stable, feels like, right, got this under control, know what I'm doing here, and it will throw all sorts of stories to confirm the fact it knows what's going on here. And there is no thing that the mind can possibly say in any way, on any level of subtlety whatsoever, what is going on here. There's nowhere to stand. Actually, that's the true safety. All of it is actually a total, indescribable, miraculous occurrence. Quite literally, because it can't be nailed down in any way. When you're resting as reality, beyond concepts, words, without being misled in any way, without believing anything the mind is saying about it being otherwise, without dreaming something else, just resting as what you are, there's no doubt whatsoever. There's a knowingness which just isn't sayable, resting knowingly in what you are, and there's no questions. It's just so obvious there. So look at your experience with inquisitiveness and curiosity, and you realize that the mind's distorting things in a multiplicity of ways, and you start to see the game. It can start with the unknotting of these ideas and what you've believed yourself to be, releasing what's not true. Let's just look at nature. It just unfolds itself perfectly. Absolute intelligence beyond what we can imagine, and there's nothing to suggest whatsoever that you aren't part of that perfect unfoldment intelligence. You absolutely are. So you are unfolding in perfect ways. As this expression as well, you get to enjoy the expression. You get to enjoy this character and the expression and the way it unfolds. Reality has its own pull back to itself. You know, it never really leaves itself, and it sort of pulls itself back into alignment with itself, back towards its knowing of itself as love in its total lack of distortion. It seems to just be a natural process of unknowing what we think we know, which naturally then resolves the problems we think we have. It's fine to have stories and ideas and play with them, but as far as seeing the truth of reality, don't accept anything the mind has ever said or could ever say. As long as you're thinking you're something, anything whatsoever, as long as you can put a word, an idea, a thought, an image to itself, that's not who you are. You're viewing everything from that perspective, as opposed to the perspective of what all of that arises in. Awareness. It's like you're viewing it from downstream. You're viewing yourself as a subset of what you are. But what we are is impossible to describe. And that's a good thing, because it doesn't fit within our way of talking, our way of thinking, or any of these limited ways of engaging with life. Anything limited or that can be thought about in any way isn't essentially what you are. It's an expression of what you are, not separate from what you are, but it's not the truth of who you are in and of yourself. The essence, you could say. You take yourself to be the stuff that's in the cinema reel, you know, the stuff on the screen. But you're not. You're the projector light that is filtered through this mind of cinema reel. It's like confusing a raindrop with the ocean, you know. It's not the whole picture. It's a very zoomed in, tiny little zoomed in microscopic view of what you actually are. And what this is about is a perspective change. All that is needed is to remove the wrong idea or the false idea.
Experience, on one hand, conceals non-dual reality, but it also reveals it, because experience is absolutely permeated, absolutely saturated by that one. Everything is a manifestation. Everything we know, everything knowable, every experience is a manifestation of that. And that is the richness, that is the everythingness, the fullness. It's so essential to reconcile both of these aspects. It's also the one within the second, that this perception of duality isn't somehow a mistake or a stain on this pure absolute. It's the absolute knowing itself. This is the process. It's manifest reality. It's the process of self-realization, the process of self-knowledge. Quite often in human experience, through dissonance, seemingly being out of alignment with truth, but also resonance, the recognition of truth, that felt sense. Yeah, something true about this. This feels familiar. This feels homely.
Yeah, there can be this seeming lack of embrace of the everythingness. Just looking at one side of things and kind of writing the other side off almost, which is a kind of duality. You can't work it out. It's too mind-bogglingly amazing that all of this expression is happening to even begin to comprehend it in any way. It's also so rich, absolutely full to the brim of life. Reality's looking in the mirror and going, what am I? Who am I? And what's appearing in the mirror is all of this. And it's just existing as this overwhelmingly blissful, ecstatic beingness. I am all of it and beyond all of it. This is the infinite potential living itself out, expressing itself. This is how infinity looks. This is how infinity shapes itself. It's saturated itself through every possible aspect of its own experience of itself. So you can zoom in on any particular part of that experience and you'll find infinity there. And it will just open up more and more and more infinity on top of itself. You're absolutely it. You get to look at yourself like this. You get to be in love with yourself. You're like not some visitor to it. You get to pretend you're a visitor and then realize that you are it, and you get to enjoy yourself as all of this display.
In the clearing of clarity, do the patterns of nature suddenly disappear? The symmetries, the trees, the spirals, the meanders, the waves, the foams, the tessellations, cracks and stripes. There are equivalent patterns that make up the sense of self. All things, inner and outer. In the luminosity of lucidity, the superficial appearance of things may not necessarily change. The ego is like a fleeting flame, glowing in the eternal fire of reality. And what does the character of the seeming individual flame matter to the fullness of the fire? In the light of love, the illusion of individuality, duality, is seen for what it is, but patterns need not change. They may or may not. The contractions, the limitations, the narrowness within the ego structure soften, loosen, along with the suffering that felt so personal, that seemed to define us and limit our potential and our experience of this infinite potential. So now, in this recognition, in this understanding, this lucidity, I'm expressed in these countless ways. All of this seemingly dualistic manifestation is my expression. None of it hinders me. This rich tapestry of life, these benign patterns.
Everything is pure divine light, pure divine Shakti, God in expression. And then we have this program thrown into that That's also the light, but it's like a program within that will then interpret the light in various ways. And then we invest so strongly in these stories and situations and emotions that the ego grips onto. That contracted perspective, that push and pull of desire and fear. Actually, all that's going on there is just pure divine expression of light that everything always was. There's nothing else. There's absolutely nothing else. There's only the flow of the whole thing, this miraculous experience. You can only wear masks for so long before your arms get tired and the mask falls to the floor and you show who you really are. You know, you can make patterns in water. It's still water. It's still the same thing. It just looks different. So even in the midst of like what might seem like a very intense, emotional experience, there's always something in the background kind of smiling. You can get yourself right into the midst of a contracted kind of like horrible bit of turmoil. And if you can just see it for what it is, then that whole thing unravels itself at any point, because it's all made of the one substance. The light prior to the prism that it shines itself through has never left home.
When you define something, you put a limit around it. You contain it. You limit its meaning to something specific. And then you can contrast and compare with other things. There's this basic sense of limitation put on top of experience. And that also gets applied to ourselves. Then we go on this endless quest of trying to complete ourselves. I'm putting in great effort. I feel resistive. Things aren't going the way I want them to go. I'm trying to be here now. I'm trying to be present. You feel you're limited, confined to a body. And it's just an innocent state of ignorance, a case of mistaken identity. Just as you may be defining a certain experience, you define yourself. That creates this sense of bondage, stuckness, lack, fear, effort. This state of suffering dissolves through removing ignorance. If you're into the more fundamental rawness of experience and just experience it without words, without any kind of conceptualization, you don't find effort, you find something more like effortlessness, something more like a flow of energy or of aliveness that doesn't have a name, doesn't come with a label, doesn't mean anything ultimately, but can mean anything. You are equal to the ultimate reality, appearing in a multiplicity of ways. It's only about questioning the validity of your beliefs, and the suchness beyond words, beyond concepts, becomes your compass.
You've just created a pseudo-identity. You've created an alter ego that doesn't exist. It's all labels put together, made into a nice little neat story, which then is believed in. So it's nothing but labels. What is here right now if you drop all of the labels and all of the ideas and everything you've learned? The interpretations, the stories, the beliefs, this continuous narration of what's going on, just for a moment, toy with the idea that none of that actually exists. Looking into the truth of what this direct experience now is, and just drop all ideas about the past and the future and be with this direct phenomena of this unbelievable, indescribable, mysterious moment that is unfolding perfectly to itself. The powerful, easeful flow of reality. Like there's a profound and rich intelligence there. It's all seen in its correct perspective, in its correct context, which is it's not requiring this little tiny doer struggling around with effort. When you really look at these feelings, the charge slowly diminishes, then it becomes clearer what it is, and then it's easier to look, and then you look some more and it becomes easier and easier to look, and it's astounding in what it is. And within that, it's expressing itself, doing what it does. This rich display that you can see and hear and feel right now. Reality is perfectly lined up with itself, and everything just flows.
Are we separate? Are moments separate? These are imposed constructs. They do not hold experiential reality. We have this veil that's placed over us. We've extended this assumption of separation over various areas of human life. all the way from believing that we are an individual thing with autonomy moving through the world, to the paradigms which we live in, which are all controlled by these ideas of separation. You're taking diversity to be the final nature of your existence. You're believing something about reality that's just a belief. So what we really want to do is test our experience. Do you actually experience any separation? Sense into the reality of what you're going through. Go deeper, feel the rawness, the intensity, the vibration, and just see what happens. Mind can only be framed in these ideas. Don't know. Anything knowing intellectually is not it. But we can't deny this multiplicity that the One has chosen to manifest as. We're not saying deny the constructs. We need them to function as humans in society. Just question their validity. That's all. See it below that illusion and look for the consistent element, the thing that does not change. Tune into that thing that never goes away. You tune into the unity and you stay there. Then you begin to see that reality was never a puzzle of pieces that you could just, shuffle around. It's one consistent wholeness on which all of this transient stuff take place. There's nothing actually breaking up experience. That's just in concept only. Experience is just shape-shifting. But the reality of it is that there's no separation here, despite what the experience is manifesting as. The limitation you impose is waiting to be set free.
That feeling of open-heartedness, it's the dimension that you're not doing. It's not a positive love or intentional. It's the fabric. It's unconditional love, which all that means is, there's no conditions. And that bliss is the bliss of freedom, but it's also the bliss of whether you're feeling pain or neutral or pleasure. There's some relief that who I am is okay, that who I am can't be hurt while I'm feeling pain and can't be killed or destroyed. And then here I am in this human, realm playing it out. But ultimately it's okay. Whatever you want to call that, that's the other word besides awareness, is the knowing that it's okay. Well, what knows it? Or the feeling or the sense all is well. That's the realization or the awake consciousness knowing itself as reality or mystery.
When we do not accept the temporal and transient nature of reality, and we're trying to keep what's currently with us from going, or we're trying to repel what we think might be coming, that causes suffering. And so there's always the advice, let that go. So it can be done from ego or me, trying to let go of things. And it does help in diminishing and weakening the idea of me. But I would say ultimately, it's kind of a surrender to the self. The idea of me is somewhat strengthened by the idea of holding on or, clinging and repelling. And so, it is very difficult for a me to let go because that's partially where it's getting its stability from. But there is a kind of a ceasing and relaxing, and that isn't so egoic and just relaxing and surrendering into it. The ego might want to try to turn it into something it can do. I'm going to actively let go of things, but eventually the actively letting go has to be let go of. It's the pushing away and trying not to embrace is what creates the conflict. And, that which is not resisted and denied is automatically accepted, allowed, and embraced.
We think we are going through life, gaining experience, with the constant dissatisfaction, the constant craving and seeking that we have, whether that acquisition be material or intellectual or spiritual, it's still acquisition. That idea of lack creates selfishness and self-centeredness and ownership. It's the struggling and the striving that fuels the fire of the lack. But that is all imaginary. It's a knowledge store, that makes us a person, that makes up this identity. It's about acquiring and holding on. We think holding on permanently. All of these things that we perceive with our senses, they're temporal, they're time-based. The awareness behind the noticing is the only constant. That's the thing that's there. That's the only real thing. That's the core, the ground, the basis of it all. The I am is God. It creates all. The simple, the constant, the all-embracing is the thing that we miss. And the transience, the moments of remembered pleasure are the things that we base our hopes and dreams, and therefore the progress and the path of our life is based on those little snippets of distraction. It's only our attention to the wrong aspect of the experience that creates the problem of lack. We're complete. We lack nothing at all. We are all.
Who am I? What am I? What is my deeper truth? What's the nature of this moment? We want to get to the truth. We're tired of our usual understanding of life and ourselves, and we want to get to what is at the heart of the matter. The mind can only guess, it can only jump to a conclusion, and it seems as if reality can forget itself, can mistake expressions of itself for something other than reality. You, consciousness, manifest and experience yourself as this very moment, always creating, causing, and you're always knowing, you're always perceiving how you manifest. And this is it. This is how you show up. If we just soften our interpretations and be present with what's there beyond the stories, there's no duality. This is all the fabric of reality, seemingly appearing in unique ways. And so we can celebrate the various expressions of reality. This is truth actualized. This moment is self-knowledge. The process, the unraveling of remembrance.
Exactly. And that's the only thing that's ever going on. Life knowing itself. And as an expression of life, we have a temptation to try and then judge life and take it personally. Because we don't see the larger context of everything immediately, we see our very small, contracted view of things that we're interested in. What's the truth here? What is the direct experience? What is this made of? As opposed to, what does my mind think it is? What do my stories tell me about it? That you look a bit closer and it becomes clear it's not it's not what you thought it was. If you just be nakedly with that as a direct, non-interpretive experience, as opposed to going via the thinking mind and your past and your interpretations, your memories. There's actually only ever knowing, or experiencing. If you're directly with these experiences, they're alive. They're these amazing sort of pieces of art that are expressing spontaneously in the moment, never to be seen again in the exact same way. Always changing, like an ever-shifting piece of art. And the more time you spend with that, you start to feel what that's like. And eventually you see what the truth is. Nothing actually changes. That your go-to mode isn't thoughts and the framework that it creates. You can see beyond that mode and go to reality as it is.